You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Riggs Eckelberry. He's the CEO of OriginClear and pioneer of water on demand, trademark term. So we're going to talk about his background and what these things are, what they mean. So welcome, Riggs. Thank you for coming.
Richard, it's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background. What is your interest in water and accessibility to water? What sparked it?
It's kind of, I got manhandled into the water space because I really had a wonderful time in the .com, learned how to be a disruptive marketer, and was accustomed to fast disruption, right? Which we're continuing to see in the tech space. And then when I finally was qualified to become a CEO, I spoke to a fund and they said, oh, sure, you can be CEO, but it's going to be in the green space, right? So they gave me a company to launch and, some technology and so forth that initially was in the algae. Today we don't even talk about it anymore, but algae at one point, 17 years ago, was exciting for biofuels, right? Then fracking came along and the price of fuel dropped and it wasn't competitive. But we then were able to reuse the technology to transform water. And that was interesting because then I learned that the water industry is not big into change. They're like, everything's fine. We don't need to change anything. But the fact is they're in crisis.
What do you mean they're in crisis? What's going on?
Well, just to give you one stat, in just 4 years now, 2029, there's going to be an unmet budget of $435 billion a year for American water infrastructure. That's according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. So nobody's going to make up a $500 billion annual unmet budget. It's not going to happen, right? So what happens when all that stuff, because it's not just stuff getting old, it's also seawater intrusion, climate change, a bunch of things are happening all at once. So how do you remedy it? Well, the easy solution, which is becoming really trendy now, is for business to do its own water treatment. Don't touch the fresh water, that's fine. But the dirty water is the challenge. And if you can get business to take care of its own, be responsible for its own effluents.
You mean like gray water, not black water, right? Like
I mean
faucet water, but not toilet water.
Oh, you can do toilet water, you can do any water. But first of all, you got to realize something. Industry and agriculture is 90% of all of the water demand. Consumers are only 10%. So if you want to make real change happen, you do something with the industrial users. That's where it's at. And you focus on what they're not doing well, which is cleaning the water that they are making dirty, right? The effluent. Let's say in a brewery, it's the stuff you use to make the beer, right? It's not very dirty, but there's a lot of it. It takes 7 liters of water to make 1 liter of beer. Well, what happens to the 6 liters, right? It has to be cleaned. And unfortunately, the water districts are overwhelmed and they're saying, no, I can't handle it, can't do it. They're raising prices. That's not working. And in fact, there's a lot of inflation going on. So,
what's this too? I just realized, if you run a water treatment plant and you're getting effluent from like 10 different industries, it'll be much harder to clean that once it's all mixed than if you got it further closer to the source and you only had, let's say, beer. You only had the beer, elements in it instead of maybe other chemical wastes and things that would make it harder to separate.
You are so perceptive because what's happening is because it's a one size fits all, they're not doing a great job. Now what's happening is lawyers are launching class action suits because of the forever chemicals and so forth, not against the city, but against the original polluter. The original polluter says, what? I sent the water to the city. It was supposed to be clean, but it wasn't. So out of self-preservation, they're having to treat the water themselves. And frankly, it shouldn't be otherwise. You should treat your own water. What's the big deal? I mean, that makes too much sense. So we have this movement called decentralized water where, those who make it dirty, clean it before they either reuse it or use it to irrigate or send it to the city or whatever it is, but they take responsibility for it. And that is a growing movement.
Okay. So what industries have harder to treat water than others? If you made a Pareto, what makes it hard to treat versus not? Which industries are amenable to doing it themselves or, how would this be solved?
Well, we go by the people that are the most in trouble, right? Those are the ones that are the best customers. They got to have it. And one space, for example, one vertical is mobile home parks desperately need better sanitation. The idea of sanitation in a mobile home park is basically put it in a lagoon and let it sit. It's not very pretty. So mobile home parks, RV campgrounds, freeway rest stops, housing developments that have been developed beyond where the sewage is available. These are all, ready-made because, for example, north of Dallas, there's a land boom going on and it's outstripping the sewage capabilities. So now you have a housing development that's 15, 20 miles from a processing plant. It's going to cost millions to run a high-pressure sewage line to that plant. Why not just do it on site? And that's what we are satisfying. So, if you think of it as an inverted triangle, the bottom of that triangle is the people that gotta have it. They gotta have it or else they're out of business. And that's who we've been servicing the most. The really, really gnarly problems, oil and gas, very toxic waste are being handled at there's different levels of need. Like if you're a large factory, then you're going to have to put in, a $25 or $50 million system. And so there are companies out there that do the high-end stuff. What we do is do the everyday. For example, we help power plants clean their water, and that's, let's say, a $5 million project. That's what we do all day long. So we have, first of all, just treating it, never mind the part I'm going to get to. There's this growing demand for do-it-yourself water treatment. And we're in there with these cool modular systems that you drop in place, connect them up, and nobody has to be an expert. So that's step one. Then what we found was in order to go beyond the people that have to have it to the people who would like to have it, we had to fix the problem that nobody is set up to spend $1 million. Let's say you're a brewery. You're financed to make beer, not to clean water that you thought the city was going to take care of. And so they don't have that $1 million. And we say, no, it's okay. We'll finance it, give you the machine. It'll remain our property and you pay by the gallon like you're used to. That's very, very popular. We're finding that to be super exciting. So it's water as a service. And here's what's great about it. The water industry is historically very low margin. It's kind of like the car industry, right? It's very low margins, but lots of volume. But now, just like what we got with the robotaxi coming along, water as a service is vastly more profitable and is really going to transform the water industry into something exciting. So that's what we call water on demand, which is we'll give you a machine. Instead of making that, let's say on a $1 million system, we make $150,000 net profit. Well, instead of making that money, we have the investor pay the $1 million, investors, we have investors, and we don't take that $150,000, but we take it in fees, and it's as much as 15 times over a 20-year contract, that original $150,000. So why wouldn't I take that profit again and again and again, as opposed to one time? That's the logic of all recurring revenue, right? So it's high time for the water industry to get into the 21st century and start getting water as a service.
So ideally, what would this look like? Would you need, I guess within a city, would you have a dedicated treatment plant for each major type of effluent? Would that be a good system? And all the people that are in that industry contribute to the funding and running of that plant, let's say, so that they don't discharge, raw effluent to like one common plant that has to handle it all? Like, what do you think this would look like and who would pay for what in a fair system that would benefit everybody?
Well, you're talking about pooling, and that is one idea, but what works most directly is because we've miniaturized it so that even a small brewery can have a water treatment system in its corner. So why not have their own? They have their own. It's just like having their own chillers. Why would you have a central chiller location that people have to go to? Just have your own setup and you treat your water. And because people have different uses for that water, some of them want to recycle it. Some of them want to send it back to the city. Some of them want to use it for irrigation. So why not let, it's like, I often think that I grew up in Europe where there's a lot of mass transit, but nobody loved mass transit, right? It was okay, but it was not fun. And you still had to get to the subway entrance. And then from the subway at the other side, you had to go to your location. Well, now we're moving towards individual cars that are robots, and it's door to door, right? It's simple. And so that's really what it's about is one site, one system, basically. And that's what's exciting about it.
Right, but why would it function any better? What are the parameters under which it needs to operate to ensure that it's fixing the problems from the past?
Oh, okay. So now these are all connected systems. So imagine when I put in place a water system at a brewery, I've got sensors that monitor the quality of the outgoing water. right? And I'm being paid by the gallon. And of course, I'm being paid by the gallon of water that meets regulations, right? Otherwise, I won't get paid. So as needed, I will send out technicians to maintain that system. But we're now able to make them small enough that they're literally, we were putting in brewery systems that fit in, less than 500 square feet. I mean, you just put them in a corner and let them go. Why would you want to do a central one? And, there's examples of that being done. For example, in California, there's Kern County is it's actually the most productive county in America for oil production. And all 23 oil producers send their produced water to one place called Valley Disposal. And Valley Disposal takes care of it all. So that is done, right? It happens. Only problem is that Valley doesn't do a great job and the 23 oil producers don't care. They're like, hey, I sent it to Valley. Valley took care of it. Well, it didn't. But the real problem is, how do you get responsibility? How do you make sure that people do what they're supposed to? That is, put a system on site that meets the requirements, that run under contract by us, Water on Demand, that we make good money on, and they don't have to worry. And if the thing starts misbehaving, somebody shows up from the head office from us to fix it. So it's really, for them, it's virtual water treatment and the simplest possible method. Because you start doing a pooled community and then one of the parties starts misbehaving or going out of business, and then you have a financial crisis, and then the pooled system doesn't work well, and who's responsible? You have community issues. Whereas here, it's very granular. One business, one water system, and they can have variations in the effluent, and it's suited exactly to that user. And, I'll remember that also there's a use for that water, but different users want to use it differently, right? If I send it all to a central location, I've given up the ability to recycle it myself. One of the benefits of doing my own water treatment is it's going to lower my water rates because I will recycle. I'll reuse my water. Guess what? That helps with droughts. So it's a win-win.
What about combining water collection? If you're in an area where there's any significant amount of rain, why not also have, the treatment part double and have cisterns to collect rainwater so you have a lot more water to play with?
A wonderful concept. It's not our space. We don't deal with that water, rain harvesting and so forth. We've done projects like that. We have a division in.
The reason why I say is look, if you're going to put down a footprint and put down all this equipment and everything, yes, I know it's not your main industry, but if it's yet another way, since you're putting that in anyway at the time of the project, maybe you could partner and get some of that put in. So it just amplifies the ability of the system to function,
It's a great idea. The problem is the selfishness of the users. They're like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to treat my own water. Thank you very much. I get water from the city. It's all good. For them, it's added complication. For example, one company had a bright idea of, hey, let's treat the water and let's make energy from the waste. Nobody wanted the energy part. Like, no, it's okay. We don't care. People want the basic function. They want the basic function. And by taking that basic function away from the city to the user, we've relieved a dramatic amount of problems. Let's give you another example. Miami-Dade County right now has a big problem. They have over 100,000 septic tank users within county limits, right? And that's bad. Septic tanks, go bad. They infect the groundwater, you name it. There's virus, bacteria. So they want to upgrade. So what Miami-Dade wants to do is run a sewer line to each of the 100,000 homes. It's going to cost billions, take 20 years, and tear up streets forever. When all we got to do is put a unit right there at that home that does what we call black water treatment, right? And then there's this little sludge tank. Once a year, a truck comes around and empties the sludge tank. Everybody's happy. That is the solution, is to just to pinpoint solving of these problems, right? As opposed to trying to, make it, your ideas are fantastic, but there has to be demand for it. So what we've learned is demand for is people want to put in water systems to control their own water. Number one, because they might be required to. Number two, there's a lot of inflation of water rates. Number three, they want to themselves recycle water and save money. And number four, they don't want to be hassled by the city, which is making all these demands and so forth. Like, no, I'm done. I meet the permit requirements. I'm good. So that is why people love it. And then we add the final part, the fifth part, which is don't worry about the capital. You just start paying by the gallon. And that is huge.
I don't know. So when a location, like let's say a brewery, they treat their water, to what level do they have to treat it in comparison to new water that they would get from the city?
The city says the definition of treated water is XYZ. You see the signs on the roadside. This is not drinkable water that's being irrigated by treated water. That's the level of, so it's not potable. Nobody really wants to spend the money to make it drinkable. And people don't want toilet to tap anyway. So what generally they do is they get it to the level that is the city will permit that water for discharge. It's called discharge. They can discharge it into a stream. They can irrigate a field, a golf course, whatever, or they can reuse it to wash down equipment. It's just not drinkable. That's the level that people want.
Well, what about used in the processing? In agriculture, could it be to a level where it's able to be used for the animals again to drink, let's say, or for other processes, to create slurries or whatever? For a brewery, is it able, is the materials that get mixed in able to be taken out to where it could be reused for brewery processes?
That's what happens. So a brewery, for example, without making beer from the effluent, remember people are sensitive to that stuff, they can use 50% of the water, again, just for doing washdowns and steam vessels and so forth. And as far as agriculture goes, they can take that water runoff, clean it, and put it right back in the field. That's a no-brainer, right? So generally, people want to reuse water for the lowest requirement possible. They don't want to do it for the highest requirement because currently, and this is going to change, Richard, it's going to change. But for now, it's cheaper to get water from the city than to make it potable yourself. Water is not yet expensive enough, is what I'm trying to say.
I see. So, all right. So the economics work. So if someone's going to treat to a level where they can do what you say, what's the payback period on, setting up equipment where you treat it to, again, a high enough level where you're able to essentially downcycle it, still use it, but not use it for primary purpose?
Well, if you just look at some of the models we've been running on this don't pay up front model, in 20 years, we're making, more than 10 times our profit, maybe 15 times our profit over again. That means that in about a year and a half, the machine's paid for, right? The machine's paid for. It pays for itself very quickly from the fees that we charge by the gallon. So it's a great business. And really, the world is coming to that. I don't know if you saw, there was a very interesting table that somebody put together. If a Tesla generates $4,500 profit, call that 1x. A robotaxi, same car, but operate as a service, will make 28 times as much than $4,500. So you want to move to these service models as opposed to ownership. Ownership is very low margin, and you're going to end up not owning because it's not a good use of your capital. You want to run your business to do what you do, make beer, let's say, right? So you want to minimize capital investment in areas that are not like the chillers at a brewery. You don't buy the chillers, you just lease them. If I go to a cafeteria, sometimes I see a coffee machine. They never purchase the coffee machine. They pay by the cup. And you might say, well, that costs more. Yeah, but it's fully maintained. Somebody comes in, cleans it, makes sure it's got enough coffee, etc. So it's fully serviced. And people appreciate that because then you don't have to have somebody smart to work on the machine and maybe break it and so forth. You can just have people handling being servers. And that's where it's going, is you don't want to have high expertise required at your job site, at the brewery, for example. Like, people know how to make beer at a brewery. They don't know how to treat water. Well, why make them experts? Just let the company manage it. And that's what we're doing.
What about when they discharge now this somewhat treated water? Is there a system whereby you can get some kind of credits with the final water treatment plant because now the load on them is going to be less?
Well, they're happy to no, they won't give you money. What they will do is they will let you do it. Remember that energy companies are fighting solar like crazy, right? All over the country. Wastewater treatment districts, water districts are saying, fine, go ahead, do your own thing. That's plenty. The fact that they're happy to let it happen is plenty. That water that you're returning to them, they'll say thank you. That's just how it is, right? Now, that's why you want to reuse it. That's why you want to, but you can just dump it in a stream, right? If it's treated to a certain level, it's fine. It can go. It's not been certified as potable, but it's certainly good to go into the groundwater, right? And that's an adequate solution. So again, we're moving from a totally central model, which is broken, seriously broken, and you want to make the smallest possible move to self-responsibility, right? The smallest possible move is the simplest system, doing the basic requirements, keeping it simple, and hopefully you don't have to pay for it up front.
Who owns water treatment plants in a given city, let's say?
It's the city. They put out bonds. So the city or the county, where it's got the water district, owns it. It's owned and managed by the government. And they do municipal bonds, which people invest in, and it pays for the system, and the investors make money from it. So it's very, very similar to what we're doing here. We got investors investing in the system, but it's just one at a time. And anytime you have a monopoly breaking up, you have the market really exploding because, in the first part of the 20th century, everything was about centralization. That was the most efficient, right? We had mainframes. Mainframes were very efficient. For the mainframe, for the end user, I was around when you had to, book time on the mainframe. You couldn't just walk up and start using it. Then we moved to PCs. PCs are not efficient for themselves, but they're efficient for the user because they're there when I need it. Boom. The rest of the time it's just sitting there idle, right? That's fine because the reason for the PC to exist is not for itself to be efficient, but for it to save me time. So it's turning it around, and this whole centralization model is going away because it favors the centralizer. It does not favor the user, and it's broken. As you pointed out earlier in this podcast, it's not versatile enough to deal with all the different kinds of effluent. And so therefore it's just one size fits all. Doesn't do a good job. You can go to a site.
I was thinking about asking you, why don't you buy it from the city? And then I thought, well, all right, the government's going to have a lot of legal protections, et cetera. Then I thought, what if you can become the licensed operator for a plant for a city? And now you'd be able to make maybe some changes and all that and kind of vertically integrate what you're doing with the businesses in the city.
Yes, a lot of that happens already. It's called Design, Build, Operate, DBO. And there are large companies like Veolia that operate the municipal water systems. And by the way, they don't change the formula. They leave it exactly as is. Why? Because there's not a lot of value in doing it better as long as they meet legal regulations.
So what about from your perspective? You've seen the returns on licensing these machines to have the water cleaned to a certain level. Have you guys looked, I'm sure you have, like economically, could you make it a profit center instead of just, the nightmare that it is? Like what could you do else to like vertically integrate within a city where you really start to control all the water flows and make it a much better business?
Okay, here's where you run into the problem I first ran into when I got out of the tech industry and got into water. And that is there's a whole mafia that, no, they got it. They got the big contracts. These are multi-billion-dollar companies and they got all those contracts. You coming in, they're like, no, thank you. We're good. This is their bread and butter. So all the American Water Works, Veolia, Evoqua, Fluence, these companies, they live off these giant contracts. They're the legacy operators, right? They're not going to let you mess around. No way. It's like that's their territory. But we can just peel users away and have them do their own water treatment, and that's very profitable, right? And it gets around this problem, which is that there's not enough money for the cities. That's the basic problem we're dealing with. It's going to be $500 billion every year losses. Right now it's $100 billion, but it's growing fast. They're not funded. It's becoming a disaster. There's a sewer line break every 2 minutes in America. Nobody cares much because, hey, my faucet opens, water comes out, I flush the toilet, water goes out. But it's becoming a health hazard. So this simple solution is I can't go to Washington and tell them to come up with $500 billion. Not going to happen. But what I can do is pull people off the system, become self-reliant, and unburden the system. And that's what we're doing. It's the simplest possible solution, and people are excited about it. Right now, we are bringing in investors. It's almost like a real estate play, right? You're investing in an asset, and you get royalties and all kinds of good stuff, depreciation, credits, and all that. And you can even we're even putting in a banking system. It's a lot like real estate. And now regular investors are saying, hey, wow, water. And what's good about water is, unlike real estate, unlike oil and gas, it does not go through giant up and down cycles. Water just keeps going steadily, more and more demand. It doesn't go through those cycles because water is water, right? So people like it as a space. Investors like it. You can go to OriginClear.com, click invest, and you will see how you're going to get a piece of the company, but you'll also get those royalties. And that, I think, is super exciting.
I know you said it's not our business, but has anyone, again, done the calculation? Let's say a brewery, and you're able to, you can get them to reuse 50% of the water. They're paying you for the treatment. Now, maybe if you add in, again, rain collection, I know it's a secondary thing. What if you're able to get up to, you reduce the water they're getting from the city to 25% of what it was, or 10%, or maybe zero?
People need to be motivated to do that. In all marketing, you don't want to get ahead of demand. You satisfy what people want, right? So, for example, they have a system. It can always be added to with other things like rainwater, more aggressive recycling, make potable water. All those things can be added. And that's a source of future revenues. But we get a customer who is on our meter, who's generating revenue for us. And it is Gen 1. This is the first step. It's just like when Tesla first came out with the McLaren, Roadster, it was a first step. And yeah, sure, robotaxi, but that's back then, 15, 18 years ago, that was just hope, right? So every market goes through a roadmap. And so what we're doing now is revolutionary. We're breaking the centralized model and going to decentralized. And that is becoming a trend. There's a company that just became a unicorn who is handling the biggest ones, the big pharma, big oil, big food and beverage like PepsiCo and so forth. They became a unicorn doing exactly this. We're targeting the everyday business, which also needs help, by the way, because they don't have the funds for it. And whereas that unicorn doesn't even bother giving water as a service, we have to because people aren't funded to do that. I love it. Excited. Investors are excited. It's revolutionary. It's a huge, huge, huge problem. Anything that is underfunded by $500 billion every year is a problem, and it's just not really visible. It's kind of like, oh, by the way, leave a reservoir empty, and then when a fire comes along, you don't have the water to, that's what happens. So fun stuff, like the Pasadena reservoir was empty when the fires came along, and too bad. So that's the kind of stuff that you just have to prepare for, because nobody can force Congress to spend more money. They're already spending too much money. So what are you going to do? Let industry do its stuff. And they like it because they get all these benefits. So it's a win-win. Industry gets to do it itself, and the municipality gets less work, which they like, and they can serve people, you and me, consumers, better. In Ireland, they don't pay for their water. Well, why don't we have it this way here? It's because the giant industrial load is making it impossible. Take the industries off, now all of a sudden the system can breathe, and users like you and me, residential users, can get water for cheap or free. That's the goal, really, in the end.
So these machines, I would think, you got to go out and service them. What are you guys doing with all the byproducts and side products that are generated? Are there certain industries where you're able to somehow reuse the filter, the filtrate, let's say? And then there's some where, it could actually be hazardous, and now you got extra costs to dispose of it. Like, what happens with the different, companies that you work with, and filtrate that they create from your processing and their water?
Industry by industry. Some of them, there's no big deal. Brewery, so that's going well. Let's say somebody has a more challenging effluent. You see, in order to get the permit from the city, they're going to want to know about proper treatment, right? So that's what that's about. They want to know that this thing is going to be handled right. That's part of the permitting process. So we're basically,
I just want to like what industries, so it sounds like breweries are working well. Any other industries where you'd like to, but it's just too tough, or is that revealing proprietary information? Like, I'm just curious about what industries this works well for you for, and which ones it's like, not so easy.
Well, we're dealing with users that are not huge. Typically, a toxic waste producer tends to be large. Think factory, think, chip processing. I mean, all kinds of industries out there that generate toxic stuff. They're generally a bit large for us. As I was saying, we're finding that there's tens of thousands of mobile home parks that need us. Well, that's plenty. Then, you choose a vertical and you stick with it. Remember, we're not trying to solve everything all at once. We're just trying to put in place a new model that will become the new normal. And that is, first of all, taking these large central water systems and miniaturizing them, which we've done, implementing them, installing them, which we've done. People love us. We do a great job. And now the final thing is the capital. And that's where you have a real estate-like structure where the investors come in and they do their thing. They get a return on their investment. They're happy. So the investors are happy. The end users are happy. The city's happy because they get less load. And so we've created something that is a net positive in the market.
That's great. That's really good. I know a lot of my comments are idealistic because I'm not in the industry, but I'm just trying to think of, well, why not this? Why not that? So thank you for being patient with them,
No, we think about that stuff all the time. And then we just have, what will people buy? That's the bottom line.
And anything that doesn't work is just water under the bridge, right?
Ooh, nice. I like it.
All right. So what's ahead the next, couple of years? What do you, that you can say, what are you guys moving towards now? Just widespread adoption, new industries, new methods?
What we're working on now, we've got good growth by our pipe bending divisions, the ones that actually build the systems for sale. Now we're focusing on this new capital approach where we bring in investors to participate in a real estate-like investment in the water asset. And that's the exciting thing that we're working on. We want to get some showcases up and running, because that's going to allow us to pop up to institutional funding, right? But institutional funders want to see things working already. It's kind of a catch-22, right? They don't want to fund it until it's stable, but how do you fund it to make it stable? Well, we've got everyday investors like you and me can go in And this is so rare that regular investors get a shot at early investment in a space that's going to be huge.
What about the tax side of it? IRS, I know there's like conservation easements that some people participate in, medical research, et cetera. So you said a few times you want to make this like real estate. There's a lot of law and tax law and precedent surrounding real estate. Is there that in water treatment, or do you guys have to work with, again, taxing authorities to create all these benefits? Does the system work well now for an investor to capture all of this, or does it have to be changed?
Well, it's true that we don't have, tax incentives like solar does, right? At the same time, we have a lot of action with accelerated depreciation, right? So over the first 5 years of the system's life, the users can get accelerated depreciation, the investors rather. And then also, we think that bonus depreciation is going to come back in this administration. So the whole depreciation topic, I think, is very good for investors, number one. Number two, if some users it matters, you can get ESG, environmental, social, and governance credits for recycling your water. But generally, it's for the larger users. That's really the action. Is the thing has to work. It generates, like I say, the depreciation value. Plus, investors get a piece of the company. So it's rich for the investors. The end users like it. You're right that there may be some benefit in specific industries, tax-wise and so forth. But I'm not close enough to those industries to really comment about it. We're really focused.
Well, I know you can't know everything. It's just, I've seen and you've seen, there's very specialized tax treatment for certain things. So if you're able to get that for what you guys do, that would be a real boost, to attract capital, private letter rulings and all that. One last thing I thought of. So when there's storms, I know that some businesses have to discharge directly into, the system, and it can overwhelm the system. Are you able to create affordably, let's say, large holding tanks? So a business could then promise, listen, city, when there's times where, you want us to withhold any discharge, we can do so up to 72 hours or a week so that we don't overwhelm your system. And in return for us doing that or allowing that, we would like some kind of compensation or discount or whatever, or tax credit or whatever, because that would benefit, again, the city when plants are normally going to be overwhelmed when there's, storms and other problems.
Well, we just took the problem away from them. We're treating the water.
You want it, but again, if there's a big surge, let's say normally they could handle the effluent from all these different companies. But again, if there's storm conditions and they can't, and this, why not give the city a way to call upon all these businesses that you're helping and say, all right, guys, please, do not discharge anything for 72 hours. We need our system to, contain the demand that's coming down right now. And then once that happens, then turn it on again. And in response for you doing that and holding it, we're going to give you some benefit, some monetary benefit or whatever, tax benefit.
Well, it's a good idea. Most of the time, they'll just discharge into the ground, right?
That's what I mean. Yeah. And cause damage. I've seen that.
Oh, it's treated. It's treated water.
So, there's sometimes untreated discharges that are
Or that, okay. Oh, obviously, we're not talking about, there's a big problem with sewage overflow of municipalities. But that's because of the centralized model. If you decentralize, by definition, you're creating a more adaptive system because it's not a central point of failure. So individual sites can do their own water treatment of the stuff that they have, and they'll be.
What if there's a further adaptation? Like again, this, again, when the conditions are like that, I know you're reducing the load already by what you're doing, which is great. But is there a need to further do that again with, let's say, just some kind of simplified holding for a short period of time? Just an idea. I have no idea if it would be viable, but maybe it's an extra benefit to the city. Further reduces that when needed. Are there peak or off-peak discharge times for the plants as well?
Not really, no. Again, we're not dealing.
If there was, that'd be cool, because then you could hold it till nighttime, let's say, and then discharge it and get better rates, just for instance.
Sure. Good ideas. We're in the early days. So you're giving me a whole lot of interesting ideas, but these are the early days. We want to create a new investable asset called water. It doesn't exist today. We will be the first. And we are rewarding investors greatly for being part of that. And we keep it simple. They get water system, they have a piece of it, they get the depreciation, they get their income, they get the shares in the company, all that good stuff. And now we can go from there.
Okay. Well, excellent. So how can listeners find out about what you're doing? I would guess that they probably have to be qualified investors, accredited.
We allow accredited and unaccredited. We have two offerings. One is a crowdfunding, one is regular. All people have to do is go to originclear.com and hit the little invest button. And also I invite all investors to join our monthly Legends of Water broadcast, which in fact is the third Thursday every month. So it's literally happening the 16th. And we have, important guests, and we talk about stuff that's really talking about the company and so forth. But the basic idea is jump in, go to originclear.com, find out how you can get involved. The crowdfunding is as low as $1,000. And of course, we have great offers for people who can do more.
Okay. Well, very good, Riggs. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast and tolerating my armchair quarterback suggestions. I appreciate it. And again, thank you for coming.
Well, I love it when you exercise the my gray matter. So thank you. It was fun. And I hope your listeners enjoyed the byplay.
Excellent.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.